General Robert E. Lee once said, "A land without memories is a people without freedom." We would go a step further and say that a people without memories is a people who doesn't know who they are today. Since the cannons cooled at Appomattox, we of the South have been taught to despise our past. The Yankee set out on a mission of peace with the goal of conquest to reshape the Southerner in his image, to change our vocabulary, enlighten us with their morality, and force our children to remember a history that is not their own.
Welcome to Charlie Horse Radio, a conversational podcast on Southern history and culture, which has for its goal restoring the memory and freedom of this land. We are Jason and John, two Orthodox Christians with a love for the South. If you enjoy this show and would like to support, please consider subscribing on Substack for free or for $5 a month or $50 a year.
Well, you're gonna pull those pistols and whistle Dixie. If I get to liking someone, they ain't around long.
I notice when you get to disliking someone, they ain't around for long either.
Pretty sure we have time to bury them fellas.
Hell with them fellas. Buzzards gotta eat, same as worms.
What is the industrial theory of the arts? It is something to which industry has not turned its corporate brains in any large measure. Yet, however unformulated, there seems to be the phantom of a theory in the air. Perhaps it may materialize into some formidable managerial body which will take care of the matter for us. A United States Chamber of Art or a National Arts Council, with a distinguished board of directors and local committees in every state. In the absence of the reassuring information which it would undoubtedly be the function of such a body to collect and disseminate, I must beg leave to define the industrial theory of the arts as best I can. End quote. What's up, everybody? I'm Jason, and I'm here with John. What's up, John?
How y'all doing?
And we're here to talk about the second essay in I'll Take My Stand. It's called A Mirror for Artists by Donald Davidson. And here to help us out with that is a special guest, host of the Black Ibis Social Club and Substack's favorite Romanian, Alexandru Constantin. How's it going, Alex?
Hey, what's up, man? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Is there anything you want to tell people about yourself beyond for introduction and all that?
Well, for people that are not familiar with me, I'm Alexandru Constantin. I've probably been around Substack since Substack first started. I think I'm one of the I think I made an account in the first month or so of Substack. And but before that, I was around on WordPress and everywhere. I'm predominantly a writer and novelist, and I write a lot of short stories. You can find them places, but that's a different topic. I am Romanian, but I grew up in Los Angeles, and I spent many years in the United States Navy, but really the infantry side, because I was a Navy corpsman. And I ended up settling down in the South, and actually in the low country of South Carolina, in between Savannah and Charleston, to be precise. So I'm very much interested in the idea of Southern life, Southern culture, Southern history, the future of the arts in the South and literature in the South. I also went to college for to study fine art and art history, so I have a lot of a little bit of academic understanding of the topic, and I've done some extensive traveling. I'm very much interested in the topic of today, which is the idea of folk art, or the connection between art and actual lived culture. So here I am. So if you enjoy what I have to say here, you can listen to the Black Ibis Social Club, which is every Thursday at 7 p.m. Southern Time. And you can find all my stuff on my Substack and all that. But yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we're glad to we're glad to have you here. I've been a guest on Black Ibis a couple times, so it's cool to do it the other way around. And like I told you,
I have
think
a
I
quick
told
note
you.
real fast. Quick note
Sorry.
real fast, right? This is actually for John, right? So I was at work the other day, and a young coworker of mine, guy's 21 years old. He walked up to me and he's like, "Hey man, I really like that John Son of Dick guy on Substack. You should really read his stuff." And I was like, "Well, as a matter of fact, I'm on this podcast on Saturday." So I thought it was really funny. I thought you would appreciate that.
That's awesome.
Nice.
It's good to hear word is getting out.
Yeah, you're popular in my work down in South Carolina.
It was that essay on weddings. It changed my Substack account forever.
Oh yeah. That was a good one.
I think that was it. And he, like, I've heard people mention your notes a few times, which is pretty cool.
I appreciate it.
And the reason I say this is because sometimes, like, when we do this stuff, these podcasts and our notes and everything, we kind of assume that nobody's actually reading this, but like people are actually reading this stuff. People are listening to this stuff, you know? And I often get people like come up to me and say stuff like that. We're like, "Oh, hey man, have you ever read the Substack? This guy like John Carter of Mars?" And I'm like, "Well, actually, yeah, like talk to that guy in person." Like, you know what I mean? So it's like this stuff does get out there, and it does get out to like normies or like pseudo normies. So it's actually like it's a good thing to kind of acknowledge that, I think.
Yeah, it's really weird sometimes. Like I remember.
Yeah.
Like I sometimes I think, this is not what I signed up for. I signed up to like shout into the void to nobody in particular and have nobody listen to me.
Right, it makes me self-conscious. I was at church on Sunday, and do you guys remember? I don't want to go on a tangent, but anyways, my priest shared an article that was on Substack. He sent it to everybody in like the mailing group of the church, and I thought it was pretty good. And it's funny because I saw it about 2 weeks prior, and I was like, "Man, I should share this with him. He'd probably like this one." And I'm at church on Sunday, during the after-hour coffee time, and another guy walks up to me and says, "Man, I saw that article and I went to the comments, and of course, like I read this comment and it was really, really good, but then I realized it was you." And I'm like, "Oh, well, stop reading my stuff. I feel so naked, I feel so exposed. This is supposed to be like weird internet randos, not real people I know,
Yeah, exactly. So I think I told you this before, Alex, but we wanted to have you on for this essay because both of us are Philistine peasants and we don't understand art. So we thought you'd be a good one to have on. So with that being said, I guess let's get into the essay. Is there anywhere in particular you want to start, John?
No. I had a couple bullet points that of just kind of to keep the conversation on track if it starts to hit a lull, but I don't think we'll have that issue. So I guess wherever Alexandru finds it fit to kind of dive into it, he knows better than anyone here.
I mean, yeah, for, posterity's sake and for people listening now and in the future, we are talking about a mirror for artists, which is the second essay, and it's by Donald Davidson. And Donald Davidson is, I'm sure you guys probably introduced all these characters or these people in your last episode. Donald Davidson, yeah, I believe he was from Nashville.
Yeah. The first episode we did a big.
Yeah. And he was a poet mostly, and he was a segregationist, and he was part of the agrarian movement. And I think this essay and this whole collection of essays was written in 1930, 1931. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting, right? So one thing that struck me, because I read it and I reread it this morning just so I could be on top of it, and you can actually find it for free on the whole book. You can find it on archive.org if you search it, and you can actually get it for free if you don't want to spend the $30 or whatever to buy it.
Oh, that's good to know.
because I wanted a
Yeah.
digital copy. There's no Kindle version, so I wanted a digital copy to have on my desktop to read it. So
I think you can find the individual essays published probably.
right, that's what I was trying to do, and I found a whole book on archive.com for free.
Nice.
But what's interesting, and this is like, imagine you look at the essay and you read the essay and you take out, the scant references to the South or Reconstruction or any of the kind of like historical markers. You take those out and you give this essay to somebody completely devoid of understanding of the topic, the historical cultural milieu around the essay, and you give it to somebody. What political affiliation would you think that this Donald Davidson in the Mirror for Artists would have? Like if you posted,
they definitely come off as, they come off as sort of, I don't want to say shit Libby, but they definitely come off as leaning left.
Right, absolutely. The whole entire thing is left coded. You take out the direct references to the South, and you would be like, oh wow, that's interesting, because these are granola crunchy guys. This is the kind of stuff that somebody that it will be living in like Ojai, California, or Asheville, North Carolina, or any of like the kind of like hippie kind of commune type places. This is what we're talking about here, right? This doesn't sound like a conservative viewpoint whatsoever, And I found that fascinating as a note to start this off, which I think is an interesting like divergence or political flip-flop between the era of the agrarians and the distributists and what we see as modern conservatism, which is basically technocratic, mass capitalist, neo-capitalist, and it's fascinating. Just that alone is fascinating.
Well, yeah, we talked about that a little bit in the intro, I think, where these guys are going to not just this guy, but other authors in this book too. Like they're going to say things that almost sound kind of socialist sometimes, but they're not. It's just that our political categories, our modern political categories, don't really fit these guys very well.
Right.
Yep. And then what's interesting too is they turn around and they'll critique the sort of the techno-capitalist, the radical oligarchy that we have, and they'll turn around and call that Sovietism and radical communism.
Right.
So it's
very fascinating. Well, I think that the essay is really good. I found it like very insightful, and in a way it fits very much into a kind of a postmodern view of the arts and a postmodern view of culture and literature. A lot of it is very prescient. Like you look at it and you're like, oh my God, this guy's writing in 1930. So he's probably writing in 1929, and he is writing in a post, and we're reading it in 2026, where we've basically we've gone past the industrialization of art. We've gone into the digitalization of art and a complete extreme philistinism. And there are certain parts that were just like, damn, if you only saw, the art world 100 years later, because this is exactly 100 years ago, and I'm assuming that, while the book is like the manifesto itself was published in 1930, he's probably writing well throughout the 20s and stuff. So 100 years ago, and almost everything he kind of predicts or he kind of like complains about in this essay has happened. But at the same time, there's some good that has happened that he did not foresee happening at all. And it's kind of interesting in that, we can go into that later, because he obviously did not predict a lot of Americana-isms and stuff like Rockwell and the 1950s sort of industrial art kind of revivalism of the cars and the California type stuff, the stuff that we look back and we see as like those Rockwell paintings and those or the idea of Art Nouveau and technological art, because he misses the point that sometimes industrial art can be sexy, if that makes sense. Think of 1950s and 1960s airlines and the art around like Pan Am and those airlines. Nobody can deny that a jumbo jet is a work of art. You can look at a jumbo jet and they look cool. They look hot, right? You know what I mean? Like there's some artistic element to it. And
well, yeah, and they crafted the space inside, like the passenger cabin, like that was crafted too for an experience. Like you're not just going from point A to point B back then. It's like you're having an aesthetic experience while you do it.
Right. Or the design of cars in the 50s and 60s and even in the 70s, right? But yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think his, if you guys want to get into the actual essay itself and I don't know, is there any specific topics you want to hit on the essay?
Yeah, I wanted to point out in the second paragraph, he says, when material prosperity has finally become permanent, when we are all rich, when life has been reduced to some last pattern of efficiency, then we shall sit down and enjoy ourselves. Since nice civilized people are supposed to have art, we shall have art. We shall buy it, hire it, can it, or most conclusively, manufacture it. So he's saying like when this is the industrial society's vision of art, right? It's like when we've provided for all our material needs, and we can relax, then we'll sit down and make art, and it'll just be a thing we can do. Which sort of reminds me of like the low tier bread tubers who think that when the communist revolution happens, they'll sit in the commune and like make, I don't know, internet comics or something, like web comics, and that'll be their art, like which is stupid, right? But here it's like what he's saying about the industrial society is that the vision it has of art is that it's just another product, and it's a secondary product because we need to provide for all our material needs first, and it's like this add-on that you get after you've done all that. When I think the agrarian view of art is opposed to that, in that it's something that permeates every aspect of your life.
Right. Well, I think that's his ultimate thesis in the whole essay. I think his ultimate thesis is that modern industrial society, and we need to we need to stop thinking of capitalism versus communism, because those two are very outdated terms. They're very 20th century, lost in the sauce kind of terminology. Both communism, capitalism are both part of industrial society.
Right.
And when we use the words capitalism or industrialism, we're not talking about, free trade or like the trade that goes on in the market or something like that. We're talking about the post-industrial mass globalist, finance kind of economies that we live in today. We're not talking about like, Hassam trading rugs at the market in the Mediterranean, so like that gets kind of like that gets kind of like twisted sometimes for political reasons.
And to add on to that, John Crow Ransom even said in the essay, basically, the real communists are the American capitalists.
Yeah.
It was kind of flipping the whole thing on its head.
Which I agree with ultimately, right? Yeah. I think that like we live in a world where we've adopted the worst of communism and blended it with the worst of globalist oligarchy. So in a way, like I don't know, but that's a different topic, right? We're talking about art here, right? But I think what he's saying is that in the post-industrial world, the industrialist mindset, the kind of like, I guess we can look at it as a very neoliberal mindset, has separated the idea of art and beauty from production and has made it into just another widget. The problem with the communists or the kind of Marxists is that, and you see this in utilitarianism and all those other kind of isms from the 20th century.
Yeah,
is that they've tried to turn everything into units that can be measured. Whether it's units of production or units of labor in communism, units of value, as in your capitalism, or units of happiness, right? And art itself cannot be defined by units of happiness or product or anything like that. And capitalism or neoliberal capitalism or industrialism sees everything as a unit, whether it's people, whether it's a product, whether it's art, and art cannot be defined by that, right? And in that comment, he says that you can separate, the industrialists believe that you can separate art from labor, that it should be a separate thing that you enjoy after the labor, right?
Right.
When in reality, art should be permeating our everyday life. Right?
Yeah.
He goes on and he says a fantastic thing about leisure. And this is, let me get it. I'm going to step back for 1 second. Okay, give me 1 second. I need to get a book that I want to share with you guys. Give me 1 second.
Yep. Just to, I'll read another little quote while he's doing that. In the next paragraph, he says, industrialism cannot play the role of Maecenas because its complete ascendancy will mean that there will be no arts left to foster, or if they exist at all, they will flourish only in a diseased and disordered condition. And the industrial Maecenas will find himself in the embarrassing position of having to patronize an art that secretly hates him and calls him bad names. So, for reference, Maecenas is a ancient Roman patron of the arts, like in the late Republic times. I think, if I remember right, he was a contemporary of Virgil. Late Republic, early
patron.
Empire. I don't remember which for sure, but yeah, he was a contemporary of Virgil and Augustus, I think. But yeah, so industrialism cannot play that role, basically. Like, it cannot be a patron of the arts.
That was actually the reference to Maecenas was something I was going to ask for context of, to give context of it. That was very helpful.
Yeah.
Right. So the part that really caught my mind in the first few pages was his topic of leisure, right? And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Roman Catholic philosopher Byung-Chul Han. Have you guys ever heard of him?
Nope.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a Korean, he's a South Korean philosopher who is a Roman Catholic, and I believe he moved to Germany and he lives in Germany right now. Yeah, he's a Korean-born German philosopher. Byung-Chul Han teaches philosophy and cultural studies at Berlin's University of the Arts. And he writes these great books, and his kind of big standout, they're tiny short, they look like pamphlets. You can read them in a few hours over a cup of coffee and a cigarette. And his kind of most famous one is called The Burnout Society. And it talks about how while our labor is much lighter than, I don't know, being a grave digger or a coal miner back in the day, or even like a medieval peasant, our actual labor doesn't consist of that. It's actually a lot worse spiritually and psychologically, because it creates a constant state of hyper attention or hyperfixation, right? Where it makes it to where we cannot have true leisure. And in the essay, Davidson says exactly the same thing, but like almost 100 years ahead of Byung-Chul Han, right?
Yep.
And he goes, the industrialist says that, if we do all these like great mechanical things, we're going to have time for leisure. Therefore, leisure will create art. But that's exactly the opposite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the leisure we have in a industrial world, and once again, in our post-digital world, right, which is even worse than the industrial world, is actually too frantic, right? It's not true leisure, but it's a leisure of nervousness. And I quote him that, right? That leads to pure sloth, right? And the art that is created is either pure passive entertainment, or it becomes another chore. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
a good example of that is that, like, if you guys would have listened to the Black Ibis episode from Thursday night, me and Lisa, Lisa Kuznak talked about NaNoWriMo. NaNoWriMo, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
Yeah,
NaNoWriMo was this, like, it's gone now because they killed themselves, but not killed themselves for real, but they destroyed their own thing. It was this huge thing, maybe a decade or so ago, where you would log on and you would track. You're supposed to write like 2,000 words a day, and you're supposed to hit like 100,000 words of your novel in a month, and everybody kind of like cheered themselves on or whatever, right? But it turned leisure in the arts, which is the art of writing a novel, into a fucking chore, right? Like, that's not how art works. Art doesn't work with like, hey guys, we're going to write 1,000 words a day for the next 30 days, right? That's a marathon, right? And that's something I've always been an enemy of. And I've argued against this, right? We do have a lot of time. We do have a lot of money to enjoy leisure. but it is a fake leisure. It is a leisure devoid of spirit and artistic intent, right?
Yeah.
Because you look at people that go, "Oh, I enjoy jogging." I don't know if you guys enjoy jogging. I enjoy jogging. I really do, right?
I hate running.
See, I like it. I'm not good at it because I'm not built for it. I don't have a runner's body. I'm like a kind of a stockier guy.
Yeah.
But
I do. I do lifting. I can't stand running.
Right. So let's talk about lifting then. Okay. People do lifting. I love lifting too, right? I don't know if you guys saw my picture, my bench press setup, with my anime TV setup, right?
Yeah.
But I enjoy lifting. I enjoy, sports and that kind of stuff, right? But when people take, you get into lifting and it's supposed to be a kind of a joyful, leisurely activity, right? Like it should be something that's like for you. Well, you're inundated with like Americanisms where now you got to be the best at it. You got to get the best gear, the best chalk. You got to take the best pre-workout, and it becomes a freaking chore, right? It doesn't become fun anymore. A good example is pickleball. I don't know if you guys are familiar with pickleball.
I love pickleball. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I wanted to play pickleball. I've kind of been interested in pickleball, and I'm like, you know what? When my surgery, when I recover from my surgery, I'll probably play pickleball because there's a lot of courts around here, and there's a I used to love tennis when I was younger, but I'm kind of like not. It's hard to get people to play tennis unless they're good at it. But I was like, I'll get into pickleball. Maybe me, my wife, and our friends will play pickleball. So I looked around for pickleball courts, and I was immediately inundated with pickleball coach in the area. Spend 3 hours in pickleball academy and all this stuff. And I'm like, dude, it's a game for geezers. It's a sport for geezers. Like, you don't like, who's going to get like a private pickleball coach? Like what? That's not fun. That's that's extreme, right? And
well, isn't that the machine creating employment?
Right. It's
creating another market.
Exactly.
Like here's this leisure activity, and we're going to build this whole like cottage industry of coaches and equipment manufacturers and all these different people to support what's supposed to be a hobby.
And that's exactly what Davidson says in the essay. He says that art either becomes extremely passive, which is like your Marvel movie, like veg on the couch type of thing, or just another chore, another work, like where you feel like you have to constantly work. I can't just play pickleball with my friends. I have to like get the best pickleball ball or whatever, you know what I mean? And get the right pickleball shoes and or I can't just go for a run. I have to like track my, we have created such a society where you can't even sleep without some retard going, oh, well, why don't you wear your freaking Google watch that tells you like how many snores you've snored overnight or whatever, and like just ridiculous stuff like that. Right.
This is actually exactly why I stopped wearing my Garmin. I wore Garmin for goodness, I don't know, 8-10 years. And I stopped wearing it last year when I realized that running became a tracking of data rather than just going out and running. It's like, okay, well, the Garmin says that I am well rested and able to run, but I can feel I'm not well rested. And it just became this, it became a submission to technology over any kind of enjoyment and just natural development.
Yeah, it's like if I didn't track exactly I ran like 3.2 miles.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly the exact distance I ran and the exact like elevation change throughout the route, then did I really go for a run?
Yeah.
Right. How many calories did you burn today, John? How many proteins did you eat today, Jason? Like that's like it's I just want to lift weights, man. I just want to move some steel around.
It's very
like
humanizing.
It is dehumanizing, and I think that's kind of what the point of this essay was, in a way, using art and literature and stuff. And he was saying that industrialism, and I honestly think to update it for our contemporaries, like I think neo-capitalism would be the better term than industrialism, to use like Mark Fisher terminology. But this kind of neo-capitalist industrialist viewpoint of separating art from life. And then when you separate art from life, you make art or culture a commodity. That's something that we buy into. We are drones working in a factory or in the PowerPoint factory, the Excel spreadsheet factory. And then when we are done with the being, robots or whatever, like units, then we are allowed our assigned time to enjoy culture. And he talks about this. He goes on later in the essay. He talks about how he thinks museums and art galleries are bad.
Yes.
Or specifically art galleries. And when I first came across that, sorry, I choked. When I first came across that, I was, oh, what the hell is he talking about? And I was like, oh, no, I understand what he means. And the way he says it is, he says that art galleries are bad because they are occult. And he doesn't mean occult in like, oh my God, magic, evil, Satanism. He means that they're occult.
They could be
hidden.
That.
Well, they could be with Michelle Abernov or whatever and all the weird stuff in New York.
Yeah.
But he talks about how they're occult as in hidden or separate from the mainstream world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really true because art has become, especially the fine arts, like the painting and that type of thing, has become a thing that is very different from our everyday life. Like, what is the purpose of a painting? To put on your wall, right?
Yeah.
Like, but now painters paint so they can be in galleries, so they can be in museums, not to be on the wall, right?
Yeah.
What is the purpose of, because we're all Orthodox Christians here, what is the purpose of an icon, right?
Yep.
It has a purpose, right? It is an item that has use in a liturgical practice, right? In the same way art should have use. And it's really interesting. And I bring this up because this is where we start mixing the streams between like conservatism, liberalism, neoliberalism, and all this stuff. Because a lot of the stuff he's saying here is the same kind of stuff that those guys that were into Bauhaus were saying. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bauhaus art.
Mm-mm.
I've heard the name. I'm not super familiar though.
Not the band. The band, it takes, it uses the name as Bauhaus art was from around the same time, right? And it was a German modernist movement. And basically the idea of Bauhaus was that art should blend with industry in a way, and it should be practical, right? So the idea was to bring art to like the common man type of thing. And it should have function. Like art and function should be united. That was kind of the idea of Bauhaus. Of course, a lot of it led to like weird brutalism down the line and a lot of like weird kind of like communist industrialism. But the idea is that art should have function and not just be this occult separate thing. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, we were talking about this before you got on with iconography. And I think in this sense, iconography might be the truest form of art that exists right now, maybe ever, because it's never separated from what its function is. It's like you said, it serves a liturgical function. Right.
And a lot of people, especially in our circles, tend to poo-poo modern art, right? And a great example of like the poo-pooing of modern art is Marcel Duchamp's urinal. You guys all know the urinal art, right?
Yeah.
You guys, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's when Marcel Duchamp put a urinal in an art gallery and he wrote his name on it. And that was considered like great. But what Marcel Duchamp was doing was he was saying exactly the same thing Donald Davidson was saying, right? He was basically criticizing the art gallery, right? He was criticizing the art world for being completely disconnected from the normal world, the human world, right? He was saying that all this New York and Paris art stuff is fake and gay. And just because I'm Marcel Duchamp, I can put a urinal here and you guys will like lick it, you know what I mean? And spend $1 million on it because you're completely disconnected from reality. And that's why that work of art was actually genius at that time, because it was criticizing galleries. It was criticizing modern art, And so a lot of times like people like will say, oh, that's so stupid. You can just put a banana on the wall. Yes, that's the point. Like they're making fun of the people that look at the banana. You know what I mean? Like they're doing the Donald Davidson thing, but from a different perspective, right? So it's interesting because there, when I logged on, you asked me like, why does my name say Talashenko colonist?
Yeah.
And the Talashenko colony was actually a Russian thing from the 19th century. And I'm sure when you talked about the Southern agrarians, you probably mentioned the distributists, which were the British version, the English version, right? There was actually a 19th century Russian version of it, specifically from an artistic standpoint, but they actually started in England, and the distributists kind of come out of it. Have you guys heard of the arts and crafts movement?
Maybe.
I don't think so.
I'm not sure.
So in England, during the arts and crafts movement, which is late 19th century, around the same time as all these guys, right? There was a lot of fear that, well, honest fear, that industrial England is going to destroy the kind of the Hobbit cultural milieu of, your traditional roads and byways of England, the Hobbit England. And this is something that Tolkien comes out of, and the whole thing, right? And these guys were there was this arts and crafts movement, and that's what they were called. And it was all about creating hand stuff, right? These guys were the post-Luddites. They were the guys that were like, no, we need to go back to doing things the old way before industrialism and this kind of thing. And you see that this is a lot in Against the Machine. He talks about a lot of these guys in there. And really, like, they're basically like guys that idealize the Hobbit world, the old English Shire.
Yeah.
Well, that idea kind of spread throughout Europe, and it got to Russia. And Russia was dealing with its own kind of rapid industrialization, its adoption of Western kind of art and culture, and specifically during the Peter the Great era, where he brought in a bunch of Western ideas. If you look at Moscow and compare it to St. Petersburg, they're two different cultural cities. St. Petersburg looks like Paris, looks like Vienna or Paris, while Moscow looks like a Russian city, specifically around the 19th century. And you see this kind of dichotomy in a lot of the Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, where St. Petersburg was Russia's attempt at becoming Western, while the East still stayed foreign. But in the late 19th century, there was a rejection of Westernism in Russia, and a new focus on like peasant art, right? Very similar to these new agrarian guys in the South in the early 20th century. And what they did was they started these art colonies where they were trying to just revive. They were trying to do art and culture pre-Westernization, right? So they were taking a bunch of peasant stuff, right? And I always found this as a fantastic kind of story, because you guys familiar with the Matryoshka dolls?
Yeah, the nesting dolls.
The little nesting dolls, right? All right, so those are always portrayed as being very traditional Russian things, right? When you think of like Russia, you think of the nesting dolls, right? But that's a crock of shit. They're not. They're from the 20th century. They didn't exist, right? Because what do you need to do it to make a nesting doll work? You need to have really good machining to be able to like make that stuff so it fits into each other, right? There's no way you can do those by hand. It's just impossible, right? It would take a huge amount of skill. The whole nesting doll thing comes out of the Russian arts and craft movement, where they specifically took old traditional like images and applied them to modern kind of industrial crafting techniques, right? But it's specifically meant to look old, but it's not. It's not a traditional thing. Nobody in like 18th century Russia knew what a nesting doll was. It's all a new idea that they post-scripted as something being old. And a lot of stuff like that is like that, whether a lot of those costumes that you see in Europe, and this movement spread all over Europe. And a lot of the things where we see things as, a traditional Swedish thing or a traditional way, it's a load of shit, right? In a way, because it is a post hoc creation of the late 19th century arts and crafts movement, where they looked for old things. In the same way, a lot of our Native American stuff tends to be kind of made up, which if you guys study Native American art, it's made up by like 20th century artists and stuff,
Yeah.
Like, it's the same kind of concept, but they did that to European culture as a response to industrialism. So I bring that up because, in a way, the Southern agrarians did the same thing with Southern stuff, where they tried their best to preserve culture by bringing post Civil War stuff, pre Civil War stuff, and trying to revitalize it. And I don't know. I think they succeeded to a certain degree. I don't know how. you think about that. But I thought it was an interesting kind of parallel that it's not just here in the US or in the South that people rejected industrialism, but all across the Western world.
Yeah.
Now, to kind of, I guess, because it's very common in the Substack sphere, what kind of effect did like the arts and crafts movement and perhaps the Southern agrarians and things like that, do you think they had any bearing on like Willem Fay's archaeofuturism?
I mean, I think so. I think that, you know, I think that forward momentum in life, right? Like, I guess maybe moving through the centuries, moving through culture, we're always going to have a, what's the best way to describe it? We're always going to have I'm sorry, give me 1 second. My microphone's being weird. Okay, sorry, my thing was vibrating weird. There's always a give and take, right? I think all art and all culture is a struggle between kind of forward moving, whether it's right or wrong, right, and backwards moving. It's like a wrestling match. I think that time and not progress, because that's the wrong way to do it, but moving through time, entropy, is not a straight line. I think it's a spiral. You know what I mean? Or we're constantly spiraling. In a way, our culture and our history is more akin to the movement of the celestial bodies than it is a, left to right straight line. You know what I mean, right? So we're always wrestling with the new versus the old, and it's always a back and forth. Ideas that were once radical are now considered conservative, and then ideas that were once considered conservative are now radical. And we're seeing that it's a constant give or take, right? The idea that progress is linear, or the movement through time is linear, is a very, I guess, progressive viewpoint, when in reality, I think we're looking more at it as an orbit, an orbit where the Earth is moving around the sun, then the sun is moving around the galaxy, and that kind of stuff. And I think that's a better way to look at how we do it things, right? Because these ideas of agrarianism and you can see them in the 1960s, like kind of hippie movement, right? Like that's kind of where it goes to, right? Where you go from this kind of stuff to a idea of kind of returning to the earth and finding like art in the local and art in the beautiful and that type of thing. And those are all like hippie leftist kind of things, right?
Yeah.
If Donaldson goes here that we should have, Donald Davidson, he talks about how art shouldn't be an everyday thing, right? That we should find beauty in the everyday. Art should be for us. Like our art should be our chairs, our cars, our gardens in front of our houses, right? They should be beautiful, no matter separate from it shouldn't just be for the wealthy, like we should live in beautiful neighborhoods, even when we're poor. We should live in beautiful places, even though we don't have that kind of stuff.
Yeah. He uses the example, specifically the example of like if you go to a Greek restaurant every day and you use just crappy, thick glass plates versus going to like some kind of museum or something and using fine china. Right. And how that china is intended to be used every day, just like the shitty Greek thick plates are.
Right. And that actually, I actually made a note of that. Exactly. Like, yeah, if we're just units of nothingness, right, then we should just, I guess the ideal effective way of living would be to, just use paper plates every day, right? Like, why not use paper plates? Why not use paper plates and eat out of styrofoam containers?
Yeah.
Right. Why even bother with cups or with plates or, fuck it. Why even sit down at the table? Right. But to truly enjoy life, to have a life of there should be meaning, there should be beauty around you. You should have a nice set. You should have a plate that is beautiful to look at, right? Or at least aesthetically pleasing. Your home should be beautiful, right? It doesn't have to be wealthy, but it should be beautiful, or it should be aesthetically pleasing, right? Because that's good for the soul. It's good for the spirit. And you see this in people where they just kind of live in pods in a way, even when they have money, where everything is just gray and boring and they take no joy in the product or in the environment. And something's very interesting that when I was in Europe about 2 years ago, I went to the city I was born in, Bucharest. And in Bucharest, there's this really there's this huge outdoor museum, and it's called like the Country Museum. I don't know what it's called in English, but it's basically, they took a bunch of like real houses from like old villages, like old peasant villages from like the 19th century that are still around. And they took them and they basically brought them into the center of the city. And they built this giant like village in the middle of this giant park in the city of Bucharest. And the village has like different, like, it's different style, like homes from different parts of the country, from like Moldova, Transylvania, all the different places. And they're kind of artistically different. And you can go through all these houses, and kind of check them out. I'll share a link. And one thing that struck to me was how beautiful these places are, right? They even brought in like an old wooden church, that was an actual real church, like an old Orthodox church. And you can just kind of tour the whole area, and it's outdoors and there's flowers everywhere. And you go into these buildings and stuff, these houses, and you see like the rugs and like the utensils they used, and all hand carved wooden art stuff. And it's beautiful, right? Like we look at this stuff and it's like, wow, that's like a very aesthetically pleasing. I would love to sit in this chair, or I would love to sleep on this bed, even though it might not be as comfortable as today's beds or today's chairs. But there are these handmade crafts, like made with like love and with, there's decorations, right? And you ask yourself, these things are made by people that were absolute peasants living in like, basically borderline slavery for some of them, right? Because the idea of servitude did not get abolished in Eastern Europe until like mid 19th century, right? Mm-hmm. Yet they built these beautiful works of folk art. They decorated their chairs, right? They decorated their utensils, right? Like, why would somebody that's super poor bother to like carve something beautiful on their spoon? Yeah. You see what I mean? And that's where we lost. Somewhere along industrialization, that was lost. Are you guys familiar with like the scrimshaw art?
No.
You guys ever heard of that? It's like the stuff that sailors made out of like whalebone.
Oh yeah, that I knew that name rang a bell.
Right. So that's another thing. It's like these guys are super poor, right? Living like, on ships where they're probably going to die of like, the Moby Dick is going to sink them and that kind of stuff. And these guys spent, months carving these whale bones and making like a beautiful pipe or something like that, And that's what I think that's what Davidson is talking about, that we should have everything be beautiful. And somewhere along the industrial world, we've lost that. Where
you see, Alex, these were simple peasants who were not intelligent enough to understand that the real purpose of art is to please a bunch of homosexuals in New York so you can get paid.
Right. Right. Exactly. To be very occult and secret,
Yeah.
But I was driving to work maybe a week ago, and it's morning, and I'm sitting there in the car, and I'm like, God, man, why is everything so ugly? And I was like, why is everything so ugly? And if you've ever been to South Carolina, it's beautiful. The environment here is beautiful. The trees are beautiful. The side of the road itself was beautiful, just like giant oaks with like Spanish moss everywhere on the side of the highway. But the cars are so ugly. They are all the same color, either like gray, that weird kind of burgundy, and variations of gray, blues, whites, or blacks. Yeah. And I'm like, why is everything so ugly? Why do we make everything just so boring and grotesque? Right. And because we've completely separated beauty from function. And we've completely like, we're like spiritually devoid of, of meaning in a way. So the world represents our inner life, and our inner life is fucking gray, unfortunately, to be like kind of honest. It's because we've completely like lost something. There's a spark, and it really, it kind of depresses me. And the question is, how do we bring a beauty and art back into our culture, right? And how do we do that? And that's where the tough part comes into, Like, How do we reject this idea that leisure itself is work?
I think you just ask yourself, what's the easiest thing I can do to make my immediate environment more beautiful?
Right.
It's like, and at first it might not even be doing art per se. It might be just like cleaning your room, you know, like clean your room, bucko, you know, the Jordan Peterson.
That should be art too. That should be
But like-
considered art too.
But yeah, like, but seriously though, it's like, you know, you're not gonna, one person is not gonna change something on a grand societal scale. So like maybe that's it. Like you just make your immediate environment a little bit more beautiful. Just try to do that and then see what happens.
Right. Yeah. And when we first started the conversation, right, I was talking about like how this comes off as a liberal coded type of thing, right? I was thinking about, why is it, I mean, I guess we can talk about why the right, or the right side of the spectrum, decided to kind of abandon the arts, to abandon the, you know, to abandon like the world of creativity. And why is it that so much of art and beauty is left coded, you know? Like,
Yeah.
for example, like I was in Pittsburgh a year and a half ago, 2 years ago,
I'm sorry.
and there was this, it's not that great bad of a city, you know. It's an interesting city, not my favorite, but interesting city, right? And we went to this neighborhood, and it's kind of like, it was like a townhome kind of neighborhood, but it was very like lib coded, you know what I mean? Coded, right?
Yeah.
Like it was very like, you know, pride flags everywhere and that kind of stuff, right? But what you see in these kind of neighborhoods that you don't see in like conservative or like right-wing coded neighborhoods is the people that live there tend to be more into decorating their neighborhoods, or like making them feel lived in, you know. You'll see like art and stuff everywhere. You'll see a lot of like community involvement in stuff, right? You'll see like quirky kind of houses that are painted weird colors. When I lived in San Diego, I lived in this place called University Heights, and it was the kind of 30 plus age gay vibe kind of like neighborhood, right? Like there's a lot of like gay couples in their 30s and 40s, a lot of hipsters in their 30s and 40s, right? And they would have, it was a beautiful neighborhood. They took a lot of pride, and they did community stuff, and they did a lot of like art, and they did a lot of like, they would put statues on like all the corners. They would paint like the light poles and stuff, and they would paint, you know, there was this making place beautiful type of vibe to it, right? Which you don't get in right-wing neighborhoods. You don't get in conservative neighborhoods, right?
Yeah.
In a way, the right wing or the conservative side has adopted this, I'm going to fence myself away, and everything else is kind of ugly. You drive through conservative neighborhoods out here in South Carolina, and they're ugly. Now, I'm sorry to say that, you know, or they're just, you know, the most beautiful thing is the big boat that they own, or the giant truck, you know, and it's kind of a consumer type thing. And then people go, well, why don't we have nice things? Well, it's because you don't build them, bro. I'm sorry to say that.
And to play on that, to keep on with that Pennsylvania example, we were in Lancaster last year, and you have the same thing with the Amish keep their stuff just incredibly beautiful and pristine.
Right.
And they, I mean, I guess depending on what side of the spectrum you fall on, they could be considered left wing or right wing. But they're distinctly different from the typical, what we consider American right wing.
Right. Right. And it's very, very interesting. In the essay, Davidson talks about, this really struck me as very interesting. He talks about schools, right? And the humanities in college, right?
Yeah.
And wow, right here he could be a leftist, right? He's saying he said the problem with schools is that colleges have focused on production and industrialism, as in getting credentials and getting stuff, instead of the humanities, which is about like a spiritual kind of understanding, right? You know, all the Reaganites are spinning in their grave right now when you say that, right? How dare you go get an art degree? You know, that's for gays, right? That's for women and gays. Don't get an art degree. How are you going to make money? You know, and he says, you know, he basically like rejects the conservative thought of like the 80s and 90s and the 2000s. We're like, oh, well, you got an English degree? Well, good job. I'll have a tall latte. You know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, okay, cool. Fuck you. I'll have a tall PowerPoint or whatever you do. You know, like, and you're shocked that you have no culture because you've rejected culture for financial gain. And
that's the right coded thing now, is to just embrace the whole capitalism thing and like, or consumerism, and just go make money. Like that's how you measure the value of your degree, is how much money you can make with it, right?
Yeah. And Davidson's position here, especially on like the education system, this isn't unheard of. This is actually the norm with traditional Southern teaching. I mean, this is the reason why modern American conservatives call Jefferson a shitlib, because Jefferson had this same opinion that Davidson has about like the education system, for example. And the agrarians, when we talk to Fisto in education past and present, he appeals to Jefferson more than anybody else because this is Jefferson's exact same opinion.
Right.
And the right has just decried them as shitlibs.
I think that ultimately what we need to do, and as you guys know, I'm squarely on the right, but I reject any post-1960s American conservatism, right? I think that American conservatism post-1960s, specifically Reaganite era, is just neoliberalism with a one step behind. All right, there's no different to me than Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton. It's the same kind of thing. It is a open borders, open government. It's a consumerist, like, hydra with just different heads. That's all it is, right? And the idea is that I think we need to have new terminology. We have to have new approaches to things, right? Sometimes, like, I realized this during the COVID era, where sometimes when I was very anti-COVID anything, right? I was a hardliner against COVID stuff. And so was my wife. And you know who our allies were in the hardlining anti-COVID stuff? It wasn't conservatives, right? Most of the conservative type people we knew were just straight up cucks about the whole thing. It was people from farmers market, straight up crunchy ass liberals that were our allies in California, right? It was the kind of people that like sold like organic honey out of, and you saw that like the people that were the most along like with the anti-COVID thing and the anti-establishment thing were actually, these crunchy granola liberals that like a lot of conservatives make fun of. I used to live next to a Marine Corps base in California, right? And all the guys, all the guys with their big trucks and the don't step on snake flags on the back, decals on the back of their cars and stuff, right? Well, they all cucked over and took the shots, right? They all gave into it, right? They didn't complain. They were worse because they made their guys take the shots too, while they're driving around with like don't step on snake, freaking America freedom type shit on their trucks, right? Yeah. Meanwhile, it was the freaking Fern at the Ojai farmers market that sells like raw honey and like stuff. That's the one that rejected the vaccine and lived in her van out in the woods, right? So who's more conservative? Who's more of a freedom fighter, right? And so I really lost my respect on conservatives, mainstream conservatives in that area. But I mean, not like I had much to begin with, but that kind of solidified my viewpoint on them,
Yeah. And what's with like the whole California thing, and if you just look at a map of states that allow for like raw milk to be sold in regular grocery stores, it's all the states that we consider just utterly shitlib: California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona. These are the states that actually have the most freedom when it comes to like what you can eat and drink and what's allowed to be sold to the public. And typically we would consider the government, not telling us that we can, the government saying, well, you can't drink raw milk. Conservatives should be the ones, if we're consistent, they should be the ones opposing that. And they're not. Right. Conservative states like Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, these are states where it's still heavily restricted. We have to buy our raw milk from a butcher shop because they can't sell it at Kroger.
Right. And what's interesting, right? And okay, so this is where I might get some shit from people listening because I am a foreigner. Okay, listen, I will add the caveats, right? I am a foreigner. I was born in Europe. I grew up in California, and I moved to the South, right? And I've been around the world. Okay, not a rich guy. I was lower middle class my entire life. I've been around the world because I was in the Navy. I've lived in Japan. I've been to Taiwan, Hong Kong, all over the place, right? And there's a kind of a conservative mindset that you see really, really on display in the last few weeks on Twitter, on X, about the whole World Cup thing, and this really weird manufactured thing where like Europeans are finally noticing how great America is because we got Buc-ee's, and it's like it's so corny and so fake. I'm sorry to tell you that, right? And America's an amazing place. It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet, and it's amazing, and the people are great, and they're bad too, but they're great, right? But just like everywhere else, there's a lot of problems, and there's a lot of things that suck in America compared to Europe or like Japan or that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of things that suck in those places compared to America. And we're not going to get better unless we admit these things, right? Having like this triumphalist thing where like, well, we're so much better because we got Buc-ee's. No, Buc-ee's sucks, guys. It's a fucking gas station, okay? Like, it's great. Like when I'm driving down to like St. Augustine or like Orlando to go to Universal Studios, and I want to stop and take a piss and drink some drink a Coke, but it's a gas station, right? If there's nothing amazing about it, it's just a consumerist gas station.
Well, yeah,
right?
ultimately you go to Buc-ee's and you get the same slop you get everywhere else. It's
Right.
they might have a couple things there specific to Buc-ee's, but mostly the specific to Buc-ee's stuff are like the Buc-ee's branded stuff.
Right. And there's
like
a lot of issues.
Besides that, it's like you find the same, maybe a bigger variety than you find at other gas stations, but like,
yeah, it's a gas station with a gift store,
slop.
guys.
Yeah,
it's a gas station with a gift store, right? And you go, like I said, we were in Europe like 2 years ago, and one thing that really stuck out to me in Europe was first of all, their supermarkets might not have as much choice as we do here, but guess what? There's no preservatives in any of their stuff. It's all like mostly natural, right?
Yeah.
There's no corn syrup in any of their stuff. There's no weird coloring in any of their stuff. You can eat all the food from all the supermarkets in Eastern Europe or like in I don't know, in France and stuff, and you don't feel shitty. Why is that? Why is it that we're proud of consumer slop that's like filled with poison in our stores? You know what I mean? Like, everybody's making fun of like the whole African American pineapple in the Kool-Aid thing or whatever, right? And yeah, unfortunately, that's us. That's our culture. We are that. We are pineapple Kool-Aid, guys. Okay. Like when you're going like Buc-ee's, you're no different than the person going, I made some pineapple Kool-Aid, like it's the same thing, guys, but just the white version of it. Like it's embarrassing.
You could probably get real conspiracy brained about this when you start to think about where did this triumphalism stuff come from and who's pushing it. And because like Buc-ee's triumphalism is good for the brand of Buc-ee's, right?
Right.
And it goes for, you could say the same thing for like, I don't know, any number of other brands, or the machine itself. Right.
Yeah.
So like the triumphalism stuff, I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there as like a conspiracy brain deep cut, but like who's pushing the triumphalism and how are they, like, why are they serving the machine in that way?
Right. And it's interesting because there's so much amazing stuff in America, specifically in the South, right? That gets, when people talk about the South, please talk about the amazing stuff we have down here, like she crab soup and,
King's cake.
the shrimp and grits and boiled peanuts and all this amazing stuff we have here in like South Carolina and in Georgia. There's, pecan pie, for example, and key lime pie and all these amazing things and like amazing cultural things that are like local and real, and instead we're proud of consumerist slop that's probably made in like China or something like that, and it's like, I guess that's what upsets me. I would like when you go to like Japan, you go traveling in Japan. If you ever go to Japan, you'll go through different regions of the country, and they're always sharing the things from those regions. They're like, oh, here in in Sapporo we have blah blah blah, and here's this mochi that's handmade by monks or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's always this localized kind of thing, right? It's like a localized thing. And then here in the US, we don't do that. We kind of ignore our own traditions, or ignore, I say our own, but I'm not American, but ignore the local traditions when they're so rich and so varied. And instead we replace it with like triumphalist corporate slop, which ultimately is what Buc-ee's is. It's what Chick-fil-A is. It's what, people go, oh, Texas is so great. We got Whataburger. Okay, bro, it's a freaking fast food joint. Okay. I'm sure there's some greater things in Texas than Whataburger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's how corporate, like, consumer rotted our minds are. That's the
what's
first
super
thing people say.
annoying? You know what's super annoying on that note is when people get into these like arguments about which fast food joint is better than the other one.
Yeah,
It's
In-N-Out's
so
better than
stupid,
Whataburger.
bro.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
In-N-Out kicks Whataburger's ass. I went to Texas just for Whataburger.
I don't give a shit. I think I think
You
they all
shouldn't.
suck. I think they all suck, and
Yeah.
I'd rather go to like the local place.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So I guess to take it back to art, I think we need to focus on art that is localized and takes we laugh. Who does really good at capturing local art in a way? David Lynch was great in his movies. Right.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because Donald Davidson in his essay, he kind of takes some pot shots at film, but I realize it's 1930s and he wasn't fully exposed to film as the dominant American art form. I think that he might have to reevaluate the way he looks at art and film if he lived today, for example, because after the 30s and 40s and really in the 50s, film became the American art form. And to this day, it's really the most unique American art form. Nothing American compares, culturally American compares to film, Hollywood, and it really dominated the world in a way, in the same way that European art and novels and stuff dominated Western civilization for a few hundred years before that. But you look at film and you look at film in a way is a low culture kind of element, right? Like it captures like the lives of like poor people or common people. You look at like David Lynch stuff, which is highly intellectual, but at the same time focused on like diners and cops and detectives and poor people in a way. So there's something about film, and it's interesting death recently of value, and then the internet and that kind of stuff. So we can look at all kinds of stuff like that. And I don't know how well this essay holds up as an actual critique of contemporary art, but it works really well in critiquing our approach to art and the beautiful, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, one sort of unrelated thing we've been talking about so far, but something that I found somewhat interesting was how Davidson, he talks about the intimate relationship between art and nature. And he connects that to why agrarianism is so necessary to good art, is that it's essentially, it's whether it's a painting, it's a recreating of nature that we see and that we're intimately engaged with. But he also critiques the Northeast specifically on its failure to produce art, even in antebellum America. And he talks about very early that art declined in the Northeast. And I wonder how much influence Puritanism had on the decline of art in the Northeast because of their inherently negative view of nature. It being an inherent evil, why would they want to portray nature? As opposed to something like an Orthodox or traditional Anglican or a traditional Catholic view of nature, which is inherently good, the Puritan would be more interested in trying to subdue nature, change it, alter it to fit the image of the enlightened man, which is, of course, the rational Puritan, as opposed to accepting nature as it is. So that was one point that I was interested in discussing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's actually fascinating, because when you look at the art of America, like the great writers and the great the great poets and the great painters and stuff, a lot of them are Catholics, right? Or a lot of them are Southerners. You think of like Mark Twain, and you think of Cormac McCarthy. Who else is there? What's her name from Savannah? What is her name? I'm like brain dead, guys. It's too
I'm
early
drawing
for
a
me.
blank.
The woman, the female writer.
Is it the
Oh my
one
God.
that Davidson referenced?
Flannery O'Connor.
Oh,
Okay, Flannery O'Connor and Mark Twain. They're all Southerners. They're all Catholics, right? Or like Southerners or Catholics, right? You don't have a lot of great Protestant, like Northeastern Protestant artists, and I think that is a very interesting thing. Like when you think of Boston, what do you think? Like when you think of Boston, the Northeast, you don't think of Puritans anymore. You think of the Irish, right? Like that's kind of the interesting thing. So you think of Catholics. So even the Northeastern kind of thought. When you think of New Yorkers, you think of Italians and Puerto Ricans and stuff, right? Not like Protestant New Yorkers or Jews, right? That's what you think of New York. Like the first thing that pops to mind in New York is a Jew, an Italian, and a Puerto Rican, right?
Yeah.
You don't think of an Anglo-Saxon Protestant, right? And people say, "Oh, well, how about Martha Stewart? Do you mean a Polish woman, right?"
Yeah. And
you know what I mean? Who was married to a Jew all her life, but and then the art of New York, so there is a specific rejection of art and culture, well, art or kind of frivolous art or joyful art in the very Protestant Puritan kind of mindset in the Northeast, and he's absolutely right. You see that in who created Hollywood and art, right? The Jews out of New York. And why did they do that? Because they did it from the old vaudeville days, in the early like stage theater days, which I think Davidson even mentions, the local theater type thing, the local theater troops. And they used to go around and have these kind of like art, like little small performances, and like magicians and entertainers and stuff. And that turned into Broadway, and that eventually turned into Hollywood later on, and in the television industry. And that's why so much was done. So much was, so much of like the classics of 20th century American art, music and stuff were Jewish composers. And that's because the Anglo-Saxon Protestants really rejected the artistic world completely. So shocker, you reject the artistic world, you no longer control the culture, right? And that's what happened.
Well, yeah, and that kind of progression from the local theater troupe to modern Hollywood is kind of like, you could probably think of a lot of examples of that kind of thing happening with other parts of American culture too. Like the one that comes to mind for me is professional sports.
Right.
It's like, they kind of grew out of local teams playing each other as like a pastime or a hobby. And then, in the early days, you would have teams that actually represented the city they were from.
Yep.
And then, that grows and grows, and you get free agency and drafts and trading, and until the players don't represent the place they come from anymore. And until, what you have now is like this massive conglomerate of like sports leagues that are completely divorced from any localism.
Right.
And it's the same kind of thing that happened with Hollywood, right? But there's always that movement away from localism and towards this mass consumerist product for the masses, right?
Right. On the topic of sports, if you guys are interested in probably the best like opinion on contemporary sports and the leagues and that movement away from the local to this like mass-produced neoliberal conglomerate consumerism is in Christopher Lash's book, The Culture of Narcissism. And one of the chapters specifically focuses on sports and how it went from being localized, where you go to the baseball game and see Joe Bob or whatever that used to work in the steel mill with you, or or that kind of thing, and you cheered for him, to, teams being just corporate products completely separate from the community, separate from, from anything, right? Like that's why we have the Dodgers in Los Angeles instead of where they're from originally, or you know what I mean, or the Lakers, which makes no sense that they're Los Angeles Lakers because there's no lakes in Los Angeles, right? They're a Minnesota team, I think, or a Illinois team or whatever. But yeah, that's a very great chapter if you've never read that. It's in Christopher Lash's The Culture of Narcissism.
I think somebody's told me about that before. It might have been you, actually.
Yeah, he's a liberal. He was a liberal. He was like a 1960s liberal, and it's very interesting because he's considered a liberal, but his ideas would fit in just fine with Donald Davidson, and he would be considered an our team right now if we were to like bring it. If you're still alive, he passed away in the 90s, and very fascinating kind of ideas. But yeah, I think there is a problem with kind of this American Puritanism, which you see a lot in these kind of ideas. I mean, you see it represented in like Protestant churches. They're not very aesthetically beautiful places. Low Protestantism, that is.
Yes.
They reject the idea of art. They think, they reject the idea of beauty. They reject the idea of, they see anything that's beautiful or pleasurable or leisurely as being sinful. And that's really an interesting mindset where, like, to enjoy something or to see something as beautiful is to be considered sinful. Yep. And that's a very Puritan mindset.
Work ethic from.
Right. And the Muslims kind of have the same kind of vibe to them also. And you see a lot of that criticism in a lot of these, like, kind of, and that Puritanism in a way has been adopted by the tech bro leftisms, which is a lot of this like this really kind of creepy, weird, like a lot of leftism is Puritanism without the God. They've just got rid of the God part, the religious part, or they got rid of the spiritual Christian God, and they've replaced it with a productivity or an optimization, right? Optimization is the new idol instead of productivity. The industrialists that Davidson is rallying against in his essay have been replaced by optimization, right? Your Garmin wearing, your Google Watch people. What is that really creepy dude that wants to be immortal?
Yeah, I was just thinking of him. I can't remember his name though.
Yeah, some grotesque mutant, it's like, okay, so and it's really interesting because it's the Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. Bret Easton Ellis is making fun of these people in a way, these optimization people, because they're freaks, they're complete degenerates, right? They're lost in their own like psychosis, and you have guys that are like, okay, I wake up at 6 a.m. and I like. There was an essay on Substack that kind of made fun of it, which was really good. But like I pump 4 things of like soy chocolate into my latte, and I do 100 push-ups, and then I jerk off for exactly 32 seconds and that kind of stuff, right? I optimize my my speaking time with my wife for 15 minutes, not 1 second more, because I need to read the great classics for 10 minutes, and it's just this optimization culture is really a very kind of Puritan mindset. And it's like this perfection of like no smoking, no drinking, no enjoying life, no, art's bad. What does it do for you? How can you monetize this? Like the most disgusting word on the planet to me is monetization. How can you monetize your leisure time? How can you, and I just want to throw myself into a wood chipper when I hear that. You know what I mean? Like how do you monetize your entertainment? Can you improve yourself by monetizing? And it's just so disgusting, man. Like I don't even know how to like. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I agree. It's like, I mean, I've noticed this with myself is like, and literally anything I do now, it's like, even if I have no intention of ever doing it, actually, I'm the thought is always in the back of my mind somewhere of how could I monetize this?
Yeah.
Like, how could I make money with whatever it is I'm doing at the moment? It's like you can't escape it. It's the brain worm has been planted, and it's just there now.
Right.
Yeah. Not on the monetization note, but on the kind of the destruction of beauty within Puritanism and Protestantism. I wish we could post a before and after of St. Pierre's Cathedral in Geneva, Switzerland, where John Calvin preached. and when it was a Catholic cathedral versus when it became obviously John Calvin's church, and the absolute destruction of all beauty within the building, the destruction of the stained glass windows, the removal of any icons or statues, to be replaced by a simple wooden chair that John Calvin famously sat on, and the spiral staircase leading up to the platform that he preached from. It's an absolute, it might be the most perfect microcosm of the way that this sort of Puritan work ethic, this Protestantism, and the way the Reformation just destroyed any semblance of traditional art. It's just a fantastic microcosm. It's absolutely heartbreaking and disgusting the way that St. Peter's Cathedral was just gutted and remade into just a truly ugly, godless place.
Brian Johnson is the immortality guy. Walliver said it in the chat. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Brian Johnson. Yeah, look up Brian Johnson after we're done.
It's really gross.
You'll be horrified.
It's really gross. I think you're right in a way that, like, that's so. I'm telling you guys a story. It's kind of a cool story. So when I was in Bucharest, I was there for about 2 weeks, and the last few days, my wife and my daughter left because the way the plane ticket kind of, we flew out separately for some. It was a kind of a weird thing, and we did like a little family reunion, and my brother left and my cousins left and my uncle and my aunt left. So I was in the city kind of by myself, and I was like, I thought it was wonderful. I'm like, I get to walk the city by myself for like 2 days. And that's what I did. I just, went on foot, crisscrossed the city of Bucharest, specifically the downtown areas. And I went, and it was raining, and I was walking down the main one of the main boulevards called Cala Victoriei, and I stopped by where I grew up, like the apartment building overlooking this beautiful house, and underneath it now was like this cafe. So I'm like, I'm gonna stay at this. I'm gonna get some coffee. It's raining, but I'll get some coffee. And I got some coffee, and it was kind of like a midweek, so there was people walking everywhere, but it was mostly like business work type stuff. So I was sitting there at the cafe, and I was smoking a cigarette, and the owner comes out. And the owner, I'm like, oh, so you live in Bucharest? And I'm like, no, I live in California, I live in South Carolina, and blah, blah, blah. And he ends up being Italian. I'm like, well, what are you doing here? He's like, well, I just like it here. He's like, but I'm probably going to sell this place in a few years. And I was like, what do you mean you're going to sell this place? So there's this beautiful place right in downtown. So he probably made a lot of money or a decent amount of money. He goes, he's going to be bored of it, I'm like, what do you mean? And he's an older guy, right? So he's sitting there smoking a cigarette with me, and he goes, I just don't care about stuff. He's like, I just care about, he's like, I don't really like want to work forever. I just kind of want to smoke cigarettes and sleep with women and do stuff, And I was like, man, that kind of makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, this guy is like, he's not saying be a degenerate. What he's saying is that like when you get to the end of life, you're going to look back on your life, and you're not going to be like, God, was I productive? Yeah. Did I make enough, PowerPoints? Did I make enough spreadsheets? Did I do that kind of stuff? And the answer is gonna be no. The answer is gonna be like your human connection, the joy you took in life, the good things you did. Right? It's not about like, did I buy a bunch of stuff? Do I have a big house? It's kind of like the common thing about living in the present, right? And that's something that I have a hard time as an American in a way, because I am Americanized by any standards, and I have a hard time realizing that, like at church and stuff, you're constantly talking about living in the present, living in the present, don't be worried about the future and stuff. And I have a hard time with it because I'm so inundated by it. I have a hard time just stopping and just mowing my grass or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, he talks about the Davidson talks about this later in the essay. He says he's talking about the provincial artist and kind of what he should be doing and what his mindset should be. And he says, he cannot escape the infection of the cities by mere geographical remoteness. The skepticism and malaise of the industrial mind reach him anyway, though somewhat subdued, and attack his art in the very process of creation. Unself-conscious expression cannot fully be attained. It is conditioned by the general state of society, which he cannot escape. It is inhibited by the ideals of the marketplace, which are, after all, very powerful. So that's kind of exactly what we're talking about, right? Where even if you try to escape this, it's just there in your mind all the time,
Right.
because you're in it. Like you can't really escape, especially because you still have to make a living, especially if you have a family, you have a wife and kids to support, and you kind of have to be part of that world to provide for your material needs. Like, you know, even if you're not a consumerist, you still have material needs in this world. So and to satisfy those today, you are kind of forced into this marketplace.
Yeah. And I like where I live in South Georgia. And I live, depending on traffic and where you're going, I live somewhere in between an hour and a half to 2.5 hours away from wherever you're going in Jacksonville, Florida. And geographically, it's a relatively small place, relatively distant from massive industrialization. And yet, if you take a walk through the neighborhood that we live in, there's a clear, you'll pass houses built in the 1800s that are just beautiful, real Southern plantation homes with, the Greco-Roman pillars and just beautiful. And then the very next house will be built in the 70s or 80s or even 60s. And it's really just a shitty, run-of-the-mill cookie cutter house. And I do think it's true that geographical distance from the industrial society doesn't necessarily equal a more traditional agrarian way of life. It's infected us in every way.
Yeah, you have to be really intentional about trying to mitigate that stuff in your life.
Well, there's this thing that I always think about, and we hear the term, multiculturalism, right? And it's, to me, that's always a misnomer. It's used, when it's used by the progressive kind of neoliberal left, it's the idea behind multiculturalism. You think that we're talking about like, Deep Space Nine, where like a bunch of different type of people live on the space station and are all sharing culture, but that's not what they really mean. The real terminology they should be using is monoculturalism or corporate culturalism, because their idea is that everybody loses in a multicultural world, right? Whether you're a Southerner, a Northerner, a European, a French person and stuff, but the multiculturalism world just it takes it gets rid of any localized culture and replaces it with a corporate, television culture. And when people say multiculturalism, you think, oh yeah, it's going to be like I can walk into the ramen shop and then walk into the burrito stand and then walk into like the chicken and waffle stand all next to each other. And I'm going to get all these culture from the different places, but you can't sustain that because in second generation, third generations, they all become the same, right?
Yeah.
And what real multiculturalism leads to is that downtown Shibuya, Tokyo has a Gap store, an American Eagle, and an Apple store. And downtown Times Square has an Apple store, a Gap store, and an American Eagle. You know what I mean? And so does downtown Paris.
That's the thing the shit libs always like to bring up when they talk about the benefits of multiculturalism is the food. The food is always the first thing they'll talk about, right? But it's like you're not really experiencing the culture. Even like in the multicultural city that has the Korean section and the Japanese section and the Italian section and all these things where you can get like, the quote unquote authentic food from that country. Like you're going to drop in there as a white American, you're going to drop in there, you're going to eat a meal. Maybe it is authentic. Like maybe it is pretty authentic. But even if it is, you're not experiencing Korean culture by dropping into a restaurant in the middle of New York and eating, a meal, because you're gonna leave that place and then you're gonna go back to whatever you're doing in your life, and you're like a drive-by
tourist, or
it's
like you're like going to one of those safari like places like San Diego Zoo Safari where you're just looking at animals from outside. And you're absolutely right, but
it's an illusion. You're being sold an illusion of participating in that culture,
right? And the reality is, and I'm speaking as an immigrant, you lose your culture in one or two generations. You know, like sometimes some of the bigger, more like pronounced cultures lose it slower. Like some of the more like, you know, I guess like a very conservative like Islamic kind of cultures. But if you spend time around any immigrants, you very much know that the second generation or the first generation of born here kind of immigrants are fully Americanized in almost all cultures. Like a Korean born in Los Angeles has very little in common with Koreans in Korea, you know, in South Korea, right? Like how I, for example, like, you know, there's you know, what's his name on a Substack. There's a Romanian writer that I talk to all the time. You know, like there's Luciano Moriano and a few of like the kind of Romanian that still live in Romania, for example. I was born there, but I have nothing in common with them culturally because, well, guess what? Like I did not grow through the same experiences and the same life thing. I am a foreigner to them, right? I would never be considered a Romanian by Romanians, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And because I grew up in fully immersed in Southern California culture, while the guys that grew up in the 90s in Romania grew up through a post-communist, you know, new capitalist kind of life that I just is alien to me. You know, my cousins, I'm talking about Stefan Baiko, and like my cousins who stayed in Bucharest, and they're, you know, very similar in age to me. They had a completely different life than I did growing up in Los Angeles, and they grew up in a Europe that was changing drastically in the 90s, while I grew up in, you know, the kind of cultural America. So we're very alien. So all cultures, like you absorb the culture of the people around you, you know, and down here in the South, we talk about like, you know, we're all about big culture and stuff, but where I live, even though it's the deepest, I mean, you know, when you, it's very deep South when you really want to be honest, right? Like, I mean, a 30-minute drive north, but kind of by my work is we have this thing called Secession Tree where they decided to secede, right? 45-minute drive from here is where the Civil War started in Charleston. So I guess you can't even say it's not the real South, right? But guess what? The majority of people here are from Ohio.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't feel like a foreigner here because, well, everybody else is a foreigner here also. You know, there's not a lot of, you know, culturally Southern people here. So culture changes and stuff. And I think that, you know, you're never going to have true multiculturalism because you can't. If everything is pushed together, it's not going to be the same culture. It's going to be blended, and it's going to become a new culture in one generation. Yep. Right. That's why, like, you know, I find, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I find Mexican culture really fascinating, right? Specifically Californian Mexican culture or Southwest Texan Mexican culture, because if you ever know any Mexicans from that kind of area, they're not usually fond of Mexicans from Mexico.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a very different culture between them. Like I grew up with guys in high school that were born in the US Mexicans, and they were mean to like immigrant Mexicans, and they really treated each other pretty bad. You know, they would like criticize each other. And, you know, there's a very different cultural kind of vibe between the like the lowrider, like Mexican guys from Los Angeles and the Mexican guys that just got here, you know, yesterday. And you see that in Southwest Texas also, because it becomes a new culture. You know, cultures blend, adapt, and grow forward. And true multiculturalism cannot exist unless we have strict divides. That's a fantasy of like the World Fair, you know, where everything is static forever, because culture is not static. That's a fantasy of like kind of like progressivism. This is the same thing with like preserving animals and stuff, right? You believe in evolution, but then you want to save the pandas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? Right.
Yeah. And the that's the blind spot of progressivism, is that it wants to value multiculturalism, but it fails to notice that is its own culture.
Right.
Like the urge to like value everything is its own culture that all the other cultures don't share. So it's like, what do you, it's like, and it shapes the thing while you try to do whatever it is that they're doing, right?
It's the dichotomy of, I don't know if you guys ever watched Star Trek, like The Next Generation or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So in Star Trek, one of the big things that the Star Trek Federation has is called the Prime Directive, right?
Yep.
And it's like their rule, right? And one of their things of their Prime Directive is that we do not get involved in developing cultures. So when they come across like some planet that has a bunch of people killing each other or whatever, their rule is we don't get involved. We're not going to bring them up to our technological level or impose our federation onto them, you know? And the entire show of The Next Generation is basically this idea that they constantly break the Prime Directive, right? They're like, we need to get involved in this, we need to get involved in this, right? And the sequel show to The Next Generation was Deep Space Nine, which was really a 6-season or 7-season example of coming to grips with this Prime Directive idea, because they're trying to bring the Bajorans into the Federation, which are very like a religious kind of traditionalist culture that was oppressed by the bad guys, the Cardassians, which are like the kind of like pseudo Nazis of the world. And these guys were joining the Federation. And over the seasons, the Bajorans realized that if they joined the Federation, they would destroy their own culture. Right. And that's such a great example of, this neoliberalism idea where by joining the multiculture of the Federation, they would destroy the foundational pillars of their own culture. So they decided to not join the Federation, which is really interesting to end the show on. Spoiler, guys, it's from the 90s, so deal with it. But that's the problem with progressivism, is that the more you embrace progressivism in this multiculture, the more you destroy everything by making it a monoculture.
Yep.
You don't preserve it, you destroy it, Yeah. So I think
getting back to the essay, actually, he sort of talks about this a little bit. Let me find it. He's talking about the integrated life, like with art and culture integrated into your everyday life. And he says, in the South, the 18th century social inheritance flowered into a gracious civilization that, despite its defects, was actually a civilization, true and indigenous, well-diffused, well-established. Its culture was sound and realistic in that it was not at war with its own economic foundations. It did not need to be paraded loudly. It was not thought about particularly. The manners of the manners of planters and countrymen did not require them to change their beliefs and temper in going from cornfield to drawing room, from cotton rows to church or frolic. They were the same persons everywhere. There was also a fair balance of aristocratic and democratic elements. Plantation affected frontier, frontier affected plantation. The balance might be illustrated by pairings. It was no purely aristocratic or purely democratic South that produced Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson, Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, John C. Calhoun and Andrew Johnson, Poe and Sims. There was diversity within unity. That's the point I wanted to get to, the diversity within unity thing. It's like, it's interesting that he uses the word diversity there, because that's like the buzzword now, which he couldn't have possibly known back then. But that's what the liberal monoculture does. Like, while it promotes diversity, it actually destroys diversity and makes everything into this gray mass.
Right. That's the great irony of that entire thing. It's the great irony that they're not really diverse. They're a completely, they're a gray goo of the same beliefs. They have absolutely no diversity of thought, of even of people, or there's culture. More diverse, or culture, right?
Because the culture is this tourism thing where you just kind of go around to all the different food stands, right?
Right. It's very
that idea of diversity within unity is like, I mean, you can see with this with the church too. Like, that's what the church does. At least the Orthodox Church is it. We're all one church, but at the same time, we can still maintain our localized customs and traditions.
Right.
You have the Russian church and the Romanian church and the Serbian church and the Greek church. Like, they can all have their own local flavors, but we're still all one body of Christ. Like, it's diversity within unity,
Right.
which I think is what he's getting at here with the South. But yeah, the industrial society destroys that, and it just makes everything into the gray goo.
Right. Into an Apple computer, basically, like where it's on a surface level, it's aesthetically pleasing, but it's really kind of nothing on the inside. And I think that, I mean, I got to get going pretty soon, unfortunately. I got to go take my daughter out, which is going to be fun. But I think that our goal should be, if we're going to take this to heart, is that we really should just focus on the local, And when it comes to the art, if you look at, talk literature, for example, so much of our literature has been dominated by New York, and now we truly have the power with the internet, and actually technology can become a tool against this industrialization, right? We have the power to be able to really localize stuff, right? You don't need to go to New York to get your stuff published anymore. Right? You don't need to be a New Yorker. You can just do it here in Savannah, or you can do it in, bumfuck wherever, right? And I think we really should focus on the local. We should focus on that. But most of all, I think we should just focus on beauty in our own lives, trim your lawn, make it really beautiful, make a beautiful backyard. And I'm pretty bad about that, to be honest, right?
Yeah, same.
One thing I learned, and I kind of envied, I lived in Japan for almost 4 years. And, the Japanese, a lot of their like quality of life, or their financial quality of life, is a lot lower than America's, right? A lot lower than, like, your average Japanese person would be amazed at the size of the houses in the United States. Their houses are much smaller. Their rooms are much smaller. Their cars are smaller. Their streets are smaller. They don't have as much, material, like, kind of slop wealth as Americans do. But what's very interesting is that these guys will, I would be amazed. I would walk up and down the neighborhood, and the neighborhood wasn't anything beautiful to look at. It was just, a regular neighborhood. And even by some standards, you could say it's kind of, some of their houses are kind of ugly by American standards. But every single place, like, people would clean it up just constantly. Like, they would go out of their way to, like, plant flowers and pick up the trash and make everything as beautiful as possible. And you look at people in Japan, and they're like habitual car washers, which is really interesting. They're always washing their cars and making sure you never see a dirty car, which is really insane, right? Like, because it rains all the time over there, and you never see a dirty car because they're always washing their cars in their like their driveways, because they just don't want it to be ugly. You never see, like, ugly busted things. Like, they fix things right away. Even like roads, they fix them right away. Right. I remember one time our little street there was a sign that I translated using Google Translate, and it was like, "Oh, construction starting, blah, blah, blah. We're going to redo this road." And I was like, "Oh man, it's going to be like a month." I'm thinking of California. California, you get construction starting on your street. Well, your kids are going to be in college by the time it's over, and it's still going to be busted. And I remember, like, oh man, it's the construction's going to be home. I got to have to, like, park far away, and I won't be able to make it. I get home, and I'm like, I asked my wife, I'm like, what happened to construction? It didn't start. She goes, no, they finished it already. Like, they came, they fixed the road, and it left. I'm like, what? I'm thinking of Caltrans over here, where, like, it takes them like 10 years to fix a pothole, and they just, and it's just like, okay, I see. So I think that what we need to do is, I think we need to, specifically as Christians, is to, focus on the present and focus on just the beauty of things, and realize that, kind of recenter our mindset, that it kind of reject the Reaganism of the 70s and 80s, where we need to realize that Patrick Bateman was a bad guy. That's not who we want to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even though he had some aesthetic qualities, like his love of perfect business cards and
it's like it's like taking like the distinction between taking care of yourself, taking care of your appearance, and looks maxing. It's like,
right.
Taking care of your appearance is good, and you should be aesthetically, appealing, but don't start, like, smashing your freaking cheekbones,
right? Well, with the
look
hammer,
better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think I think the idea behind it, and maybe a good way to look at it is, you just got to find joy in things. Like your focus should be on joy and not happiness, but joy, which are very. I think exploring the distinction between what happiness is and what joy is very important, right? And sometimes joy doesn't have to be pleasurable because I think our focus is too much on happiness and pleasure versus true joy, which
Mhm.
can sometimes be bittersweet and comfort. That's where we need to focus on joy instead of happiness and comfort because we're not always going to be comfortable. We're always not always going to be happy, but we should always try to do everything with joy. And yeah, we need to kind of reject making idols of things. When you look at a lot of the stuff like the looks maxing or the whole tracking every calorie and everything like that, like sometimes we make that into an idol in a way. Like we become obsessed with reading this and learning everything and doing this, which is in itself is not wrong, but taking it to the point where it becomes a chore or it becomes a job in itself, you end up doing it without joy. And when things become without joy, they're just idols at that point,
Yeah, for sure.
All right, guys, I'm gonna have to step out and call it a day though.
John, you got anything else you want to bring up before we sign off?
No, this topic's way out of my realm of expertise. So
Yeah, same.
Well,
Well,
I hope I was somewhat interesting on the art topic.
I'm really glad we had you on for this one. I think it's been really interesting, and you're less of a Philistine than we are, so we appreciate you coming on.
You know what though, but I don't know half the stuff, man. I think honestly, like we all that's what we need to just kind of focus on, and what we're doing here, whether it's you guys and us on our podcast and everything, and really we're just creating a community kind of we're really doing the same thing Donald Davidson and those guys are. And I hope that we get these ideas and we reject some of the negative thoughts of the last 30-40 years, but also move forward into a new kind of viewpoint. Is it going to happen? Probably not. It's worth trying, right? It's worth trying.
Yeah. Well, sweet. Yeah, I agree. I think that I've got into like audiobook narration. I'm sure I've told you guys about this on Substack, but like I don't know. I see that as kind of doing my other podcast and doing this narration for like indie authors who are self-published and all that. I've started to think of it kind of in this way of like creating a community, whether it pays off financially or not, like doesn't really matter. And, having a hand in creating some genuine art, I think is a good thing.
Right. And I don't know if you listened to me and Lisa talk the other day where I asked, well, why do people write? Are you writing because you want to become rich? Is that what you're trying to do? Because I can teach you, like, you can probably become richer like streaming video games or doing OnlyFans than ever writing a novel. You know what I mean? So you're in the wrong business. You have to be doing it. You have to be creating art because you love there's joy in it for you. There's some truth in it and there's some joy, and it's not about a product. It's not about you doing it because you love doing it, And I think that's the key. We need to reject the idea of everything is for a financial, industrial purpose. And we should return back to, well, you know what? I'm planting these flowers because I like this flower. I'm planting this tree because I like this tree. I think that's the key, man.
Yep.
And I think the very last paragraph of this whole essay is important. It says, quote, "The artist should not forget that in these times he is called on to play the part both of a person and of an artist. Of the two, that of person is more immediately important. As an artist, he will do best to flee the infection of our times, to stand for decentralization in the arts, to resist with every atom of his strength the false gospels of art as a luxury which can be sold in commercial quantities or which can be hollowed by segregation in discreet shrines. But he cannot wage this fight by remaining an artist. He must be a person first of all. even though for the time being he may become less of an artist. He must enter the common arena and become a citizen. Whether he chooses as citizen person to be a farmer or to run for Congress is a matter of individual choice, but in that direction his duty lies. Close quote.
Excellent.
Yep. Beautiful. Be a person first. Be a member of a community. There we go. Boom.
All right, guys. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Step out.
Do you want to? So, Alex is the host. Go listen to Black Ibis Social Club with Alex and Fisto. Is there anything else you want to tell people about before we sign off?
No, right now, I'm going to share. I did mention a few books that I think are good, like The Burnout Society by Byung-Chul Han, and the one by Christopher Lasch, the Culture of Narcissism. I recommend you guys read those. There's some really great stuff on this topic, and interesting enough, if you guys Google the arts and crafts movement from the 19th century, there's some very fascinating stuff that really ties into what we're talking about. And I think that the reason I bring that up is because I think that understanding these like fundamental ideas and why we do things makes us better at being right wing in a way. You know what I mean? Like why did Tolkien make such a big deal of like the Shire, right? And he himself was very much influenced by this arts and crafts movement. And if you look at, the Wikipedia for it, you look at some of these buildings that the arts and craft movement made architecturally, and it looks like the stuff in the Shire, right? Or like what we imagine the Shire and what he drew. So it's interesting to realize that like part of being a true, kind of, I guess, right winger or conservative or whatever is understanding what influences us and why we move forward. But it's also interesting and important to understand what influences the left and why they do certain things or what they believe certain things. And you'll realize that when you learn this kind of stuff, that there's a lot of overlap and a lot of like currents that kind of intertwine, where things that would have been are considered up the left now, like what we're really been talking about, really were on the right back in the day, and vice versa, and by understanding that, you realize how fake and gay everything is, if that makes sense, right? And you can approach it from a much more intellectual way and really understand and not be manipulated by the basically Satan runs everything, to be honest, right? That's just the truth, right? But so that's why there's value in discussing these things. And you understand it, of course, because your entire John Brown series and the is kind of illustrates that, right? How by not understanding history, you're allowed yourself to be manipulated into these narratives that are really not true.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I gotta
So go to church tomorrow.
Go
to liturgy, go to listen to Black Ibis Social Club. We will be talking next. 2 weeks from now is July 4th. So I think we might have to adjust the schedule, but we'll figure it out. And next time we're going to be talking to Society of Archangel Michael about the third essay in this book, The Irrepressible Conflict. So stay tuned for that. Go follow Alex on Substack, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for coming on again.
All right. Good night, guys. I mean, I say good night because I'm so used to my podcast.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yep. See you later.
Thanks, Alex.